Before we jump in today, a quick note about a couple of new episodes over on Bandcamp. As we focus in here on the last few parts of the opening of Disney World, I've been putting together some episodes on different subjects to round out our overall fall offerings, including about animators and artists at the studio back in the 1940s and on Disneyland. This past Wednesday, for Veterans Day, I posted up an episode about the elaborate camp shows that Disney artists created during World War II to entertain soldiers in nearby military hospitals and camps. And this coming week, I'll update the DHI travel guide for Disneyland with a new segment focused on this year's offerings during the winter holidays. The 2001 travel guide already has one update since it was posted this summer, and this new update will be up and streaming over on Bandcamp on Wednesday. In our last episode, Disney executives watched helpless as the stock market punished the company for its low opening numbers in Florida. Over summer, Disney executives never released an official target number for opening weekend. Rather, in various statements and interviews, they released a range of numbers, all of which were higher than the roughly 8,000 paying guests or 10,000 overall guests, including those comped into the park who arrived. The turnout was most disappointing for Roy Disney, who hoped that opening a successful resort would allow him to ease towards retirement. As the company's stock price fell, Roy and others focused on the grand opening ceremonies, a 3-day event toward the end of October, as a way to more effectively introduce the resort to the country and bring tourists to its gates. For Roy, one aspect over which he was repeatedly concerned was the grand opening ceremonies, 3 days of events with highlights that would be included in the 90-minute TV special. At Disneyland years ago, Walt had personally managed such affairs to ensure that the enthusiasm of the live production would be effectively conveyed to viewers at home. All his life, Roy had been the lead business and financial manager at the studio. His instincts were honed toward effective corporate deals, not how an American audience would receive a TV show. As such, he greenlit many concepts that repeated production elements once overseen by Walt himself. Burgess Meredith would lead a massive marching band down Main Street, much as he had for the 1959 ceremony to open the Matterhorn monorail and submarine voyage. Julie Andrews would appear in Disney production numbers for the first time since her work with Mary Poppins. She would also have a unique connection to the resort, as she remembered Walt talking with her about his Florida plans back when she was working on the Disney lot. To make sure the dance sequences projected the playfulness of those in Mary Poppins, Roy also signed off on hiring Dee Dee Wood, the choreographer who had worked on Mary Poppins. Andrews herself would describe one song as, quote, a grand-scale production number with over 40 children, similar to her work in Poppins and also The Sound of Music. The 3-day opening ceremony was largely arranged through Bob Yanni, who oversaw entertainment at Disneyland. The most famous participant with no significant connection to Disney films was Bob Hope, a comedian known around the world. The previous year, Yanni had staged Honor America Day in Washington, D.C., which featured Hope. Through that connection, Yanni persuaded Hope to participate in the Disney opening as well. He also booked Meredith Willson and others for the ceremonies and related TV special. But the most spectacular and unusual component was the inclusion of an international symphony whose presence would elevate the festivities into the realm of high culture, similar to the opening of a museum, as Yanni didn't want, quote, just a Disney spectacular to open the new resort. The International Orchestra, assembled by Disney with help from the State Department and the People-to-People programs, included roughly 140 musicians representing 60 countries. Unlike most attractions inside the Magic Kingdom, which spoke to the wonders of Hollywood, the World Symphony would gesture toward cultural understanding through music. It was an opportunity to demonstrate how the resort could speak to goals larger than mere entertainment. Arthur Fiedler, the celebrity conductor for the World Symphony, explained, quote, "Nothing can better express the common bond among all mankind than the universal appeal and inspiration of symphonic music." The orchestra would perform in New York, Washington, D.C., but the Disney World performance, partially televised, would create their largest audience. Quote, "After introducing the orchestra participants," Fiedler said, "we will perform a little more than 1 hour of music without intermission at each of the 3 concerts." The World Symphony would perform on Saturday, October 23rd, the first night of the grand opening event. Beyond the symphony, Yanni also assembled more traditional elements for the Disney Spectacular that would unfold on the second and third days, with performance elements that evoked popular culture. Some sections of the grand opening would be arranged with professional musicians and dancers, but large sections, particularly of the parade, would be arranged with teenagers in high schools, many of them who had never performed outside of a city parade or a halftime show at a football game. These performances would be more familiar to those who had attended previous events at Disneyland. In early October, Disney manager Dick Bain solidified plans for the massed band and choir. Working with 120 schools in 15 counties, the Disney team had a target of assembling 1,076 musicians for the marching band, 1,500 singers for the choir, and 800 dancers for the parade. Schools with large music programs found they had to select their best singers for the massed choir as performance space around the castle was limited. During the first week of October, Colonial High School in Orlando, for example, was in the process of auditioning interested members of their 90-person choir to select the best performers for the 32 seats they were allotted for the big performance. More so than any similar ceremony at Disneyland, local high schoolers would fill out the performance and cast member ranks. High schoolers were even hired as hosts to guide various Hollywood VIPs around the resort. Quote, "Our job," one high school host explained, "was to be available to visiting celebrities and escort them to the events." In this, the resort was placing large responsibilities on young employees with minimal training. By 1971, a Disney Spectacular beyond music was known for 3 things: balloons, fireworks, and homing pigeons. As most of the entertainment team prepared for a musical extravaganza, one animal caretaker was working with 500 white pigeons, training them to return to their backstage nesting boxes behind the Magic Kingdom after being released. The birds were officially known as White Pigeons of Peace. For the public, they would be released for the first time on that weekend, with the hope that all 500 would find their nesting boxes. Overseeing the balloon release was Nat Lewis, who decades earlier had found his start as a producer for the Shrine Circus. Quote, "I'm a cold-blooded pro," he said about the balloon release, "and this gets through to me." But efforts to create the balloon spectacular were far more exacting than most realized. As helium produced lift for only 6 to 10 hours once inside a balloon, Lewis needed to manage over 300 cast members who would inflate the 50,000 balloons using 125 helium tanks and then collect them in netted boxes hours before they were released. Quote, "If we don't have any wind," he explained, "we should block out the sun like an eclipse for 2 or 3 minutes. Inside the technical team, however, workers knew that the big addition to the usual Disney materials was a 6-minute show arranged on barges called the Electrical Water Pageant. Bill Young, who worked in technical services, believed that the water pageant in particular would be, quote, "spectacular." The concept for the electrical water pageant was something Bob Yanni had considered for months. As they were building the resort, long before the Seven Seas Lagoon was filled with water, Yanni stared out at the land, wondering how they could enliven the area with entertainment. Quote, "I kept looking out primarily at Bay Lake. At that point in time, there were no horizon lines or any city lights, which meant that we have perfect black, perfect darkness." From there, Yanni imagined that a show focused on electrical lights would play beautifully against the obsidian canvas of a nighttime sky. To test this concept, about 8 months before the resort opened, he arranged for a single barge to be outfitted with a wall of chicken wire, on which a crew configured the outline of a whale, a vision painted with simple Christmas lights that would magically appear on the dark water. One night he took a group of executives out on a boat to explain his idea for a water parade arranged with light. Quote, "We turned on the whale," Yanni said, "and it caught everybody's fancy." During the middle weeks of October, attendance at the Magic Kingdom began to improve, with the park attracting as many as 20,000 on peak days. By a survey of license plates, cast members found that many visitors from outside Florida were now attending the park, particularly from Ohio, North Carolina, Indiana, Illinois, New Jersey, and New York. Surprisingly, the main point of comparison for many of these guests wasn't Disneyland or regional theme parks, rather the 1964-1965 World's Fair. They expected to find something similar, if not superior, to attractions they had seen at the fair in New York. In response to the slightly higher attendance figures, Disney increased its operating day for the forthcoming weekend by 1 hour, announcing that the park would close at 7 p.m. on both Saturday and Sunday. But the increase in daily attendance still wasn't enough for the park to reach its original attendance goals. As one local reporter noted, quote, "Early crowds have been well below the 30,000 daily figure they would have to average to hit 10 million during its first year." Because of this, Disney's stock price continued to fall. By Wednesday, October 13th, Roy Disney was again making public appearances on property. At times he appeared tired, still overwhelmed by the enormous task of launching the resort. At the dedication of the GAF camera shop on Main Street, Roy turned to GAF executives and said, quote, "Now you're part of showbiz. We hope you enjoy it." But Roy's concern for the overall project clearly stretched beyond the dedication of new shops. During these weeks, he spent time both at the Bay Hill Cottage and at the Contemporary Tower, which, though still closed to the public, now had one restaurant at the top of the structure that served meals to managers. One morning, Jim Cora walked into the restaurant to find Roy Disney sitting at a table alone. Quote, "I had breakfast with him one morning because everyone else was afraid to sit with him." Roy looked out the window at the man-made lagoon and then at the theme park. "Look at this," he said to Cora. "Can you imagine that our company did this?" As Roy gazed out the window, it occurred to Cora that Roy, born during the previous century, had seen tremendous change in the world around him. He had been born in a world of horse carts and wood-burning stoves, and now lived in a world of freeways and space travel. "I can't imagine any other company doing this, Roy," he said, "because it's fantastic." "It's too bad Walt didn't get to see it," he said. Cora simply nodded, understanding that Walt's death was still something that touched Roy. Then Roy's gaze shifted over to him. "You're from California?" "Yes, sir." "All you Californians that came here to help, is it hard for you guys?" "No," Cora said. "It's a real joy. After working years at Disneyland, this is a brand new challenge for us." "That's what I'm kind of hearing," Roy said. "But I think they're telling me that because I'm Roy Disney." At this, Cora smiled. But in Roy's words, there was some other suggestion, the hint of a man trying to understand if the resort would succeed in the future. Despite a slow opening, Dick Nunes and other executives decided to double down on their belief that the resort would prove a success by Thanksgiving. In the second half of October, Disney expanded its workforce by another 700. In part, the resort was still looking for cooks and skilled kitchen help, but it also wanted more servers, as other restaurants, such as Pecos Bill's, were hopefully coming online during the second half of November. These additional hires would be important if the resort attracted crowds over the coming holidays. On October 16th and 17th, country western singer Glenn Campbell taped his segments for the TV special. Working with a 50-person crew, he filmed on the riverboat in Liberty Square and at the not-yet-open campgrounds. As with other performances, such as those by Julie Andrews, longtime Disney cast members saw that there was a difference in this new special than those Walt had arranged for Disneyland in 1955 and 1959. Walt had relied on the vitality of live performance, filled with the spontaneous energy that an audience experiences during a parade or staged show, whereas this new TV special, in addition to the parade and other live performances, included taped performances by celebrities arranged in a partially empty or sometimes entirely empty park. Like TV variety shows popular in the 1970s, this format traded celebrity power for the enthusiasm of a live event. It was a gamble, cast members saw, that the tape performance would be able to communicate the exuberance of the park as effectively as those specials arranged by Walt back in the 1950s. On the afternoon of Sunday, October 17th, Disney engaged a dress rehearsal of sorts for the opening ceremonies of the Polynesian Hotel, complete with musicians, dancers, and fireworks. The event was arranged as a luau for 500 employees of the Smucker's Jam Company, which was a resort sponsor with a store on Main Street. With tiki torches rising up from the sand, long tables of buffet food, and a few Disney characters dressed for a beach party, the event was staged similar to the one arranged for the following week as part of the resort's grand opening ceremonies. But minutes before the buffet opened, the sky parted, and with lightning branching between clouds, rain sheeted down across the lagoon. Guests ran for cover while cast members carried the food inside the ceremonial house and set up banquet tables. The dinner continued, but Disney managers, looking out through tall glass windows, understood the same might happen the following week when another luau was held for celebrity guests, as cameras captured footage for the TV special. To make sure that the opening ceremonies for the Magic Kingdom went as smoothly as possible, Disney invited marching groups out to rehearse in the days leading up to the event. David Waits, a sophomore trumpet player assigned to the Wooden Toy Soldiers unit, recalled that they needed to practice in costume, specifically to learn how to see out of the figure's head and fit the trumpet's mouthpiece in through the narrow opening when raising their instruments to play. Quote, "It was tough," he said. "You couldn't see very well. The bridge to the left of the castle originally was arched. They weren't sure we would be able to get over it. So the first time we got to see the Magic Kingdom was at 4 a.m, days before the grand opening. It was amazing to see all lit up and void of people." The focus of that third week of October was the 3-day event. On Saturday, the resort would host a formal opening with a performance by the World Symphony. On Sunday, the resort would dedicate its 2 hotels. First, they would dedicate the Contemporary, a hotel whose construction had moved so slowly that some on the management team occasionally called it the Contemptible Hotel. Second, they would dedicate the Polynesian with an evening luau. Finally, on Monday, the Magic Kingdom would open with a parade and other festivities. Early Saturday morning, in Los Angeles, most of the invited celebrities boarded a charter flight headed to Orlando. The guest list included actors with longtime ties to the Disney studio dating back decades: Fred MacMurray, Sandy Duncan, Fess Parker, Cesar Romero, Sebastian Cabot, Sterling Holloway, Edgar Bergen, Annette Funicello, Rock Hudson, and Angus Moorhead. Early Saturday afternoon, they touched down at the McCoy Jetport to find locals lined up to see them. They waved, posed for photos, then were bussed to the resort where they dressed in tuxedos and gowns for the World Symphony performance at the Magic Kingdom. Tagging along were reporters and Disney managers. They too would need to change into formal wear, but few had rooms. Such as Disney Assistant Director of Marketing Sandy Quinn simply changed on the open deck of a boat docked at the hotel to ensure that they weren't late for the evening event. Along with the Hollywood notables were a few people who had been particularly close to Walt. Among them was Walt's personal secretary, Tommy Wilk, though she now lived in Washington, D.C., where her husband was on staff with the Small Business Administration. She remembered Walt planning out the early designs for the resort. Quote, "Everything's so great," she said. "I think it's just what Walt ordered. This is so much bigger than Disneyland, so much bigger." Similarly, lead Mouseketeer Annette Funicello, another person once close to Walt, was in the VIP group. Mostly retired, she focused her attention now on her son and daughter. Quote, "I'm still very close to the whole Disney concept," she said. "Most of my time is spent being a mother, but I still work occasionally." The most significant person on the guest list was Walt's widow, Lillian, who attended with her second husband, John Truyens. 2 years earlier, not wishing to live alone, she married a family friend, John Truyens. Truyens was an upmarket realtor and a real estate investor, a person who lived largely outside of Hollywood circles. 3 months after the wedding, Lillian and her new husband made their first public appearance in California, where they attended the annual Disneyland Christmas party. Though the event attempted to publicly ease Truyens into the Disney family, he never took to that role. The public as well seemed content remembering Walt as a man who stood often by himself on a TV screen, talking about films he had made and theme park attractions about to open. If the public remembered Walt with others, it was more likely his animators and Imagineers who occasionally appeared with him. The grand opening of Disney World marked the first appearance of Lillian and her new husband in Florida. In ways, the event held the flavors of a high school reunion, a gathering of people who once circled around Walt, from Fess Parker to Fred McMurray, from Tommy Wilk to Annette Funicello, though they each had now moved on in new directions. Rather than hearkening back to the days of Walt with nostalgia, this, too, served as a reminder that the era of the Disney brothers was coming to a close, and the culture of the Florida resort would be arranged by those who worked there, specifically the new cast members and the managers who had moved there from California. Also arriving there that day were the 140 musicians that formed the World Symphony. When Arthur Fiedler, the celebrity conductor for the Boston Pops, arrived for a photo session, he found himself on Main Street as the midday parade was ready to begin, when an entertainment supervisor asked if he would like to ride on the fire truck. To this unusual request he agreed, where he soon found himself traveling with characters toward the hub. Guests, some of them confused, watched the elderly conductor, with his thick gray hair, move down the street before them. Some visitors recognized him by sight, but others were confused by his air of celebrity. One spectator yelled out, "That's Colonel Sanders!" Though some musicians arrived in the morning, many traveled together, landing at the McCoy Jetport at 3:30 p.m., and then were bussed over to the Magic Kingdom, where quickly they set up in the castle forecourt for the evening performance. Of their 3 concerts, this was the only one staged outdoors, as the other 2, in New York and Washington, D.C., were in concert halls. Violinist Alfonso Carlo took a moment to be photographed with the characters. Quote, "It isn't every day in the music world I get my picture taken with Pluto," he said. Cellist Vaclav Kirovec reflected on his youth in the 1930s. Quote, "This is a beautiful fantasy," he said. "As children we saw Walt Disney films in Czechoslovakia. Now we don't have them. This makes me feel young again." With dozens of celebrities coming into town, the Magic Kingdom saw its largest crowd to date, with roughly 8,000 cars filling the 12,000 spots in the parking lot by 1 p.m. Quote, "We had a lot more traffic," said Highway Patrol Sergeant E.L. Herring, "but I'm pleased with the way it moved." Though Disney was still not releasing numbers, outsiders estimated that the Magic Kingdom, though not full, had attracted close to 40,000 guests, which was a substantial increase over previous levels. Though many day guests expected to be turned out of the park as the VIP guests arrived for the after-hours performance, they were surprised to find that they were allowed to line up on Main Street as celebrities and the orchestra arrived. They were also allowed to sit along Main Street and on the grass as the symphony performed. Quote, "It was as though they were the real audience," one observer noted, and the celebrities and the press in their $15 rented tuxedos were all part of the show. Cast members, too, listened as they were able. For those stationed far from the castle, the 90-minute TV special would include a few highlights, and for those wishing to see the entire concert, a local channel in Orlando would broadcast the entire performance on Thanksgiving. Still, cast members lined up just beyond the folding chairs to watch. Others stationed in Main Street shops came to the front doors to listen. And for those working in the utilidor directly beneath the castle, they simply looked up at the ceiling, hoping the sound would penetrate. They jokingly called the event Fieldler on the Roof. With 2,500 guests seated in folding chairs before the castle, the performance opened just after 8 p.m. with the low thunder of kettle drums that progressed into Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man. From there, the orchestra performed symphonies by Respighi and Bach, ending with It's a Small World and Stars and Stripes Forever. Some of the musicians wished that the performance had been inside to improve the acoustics and performance during the taping. Quote, "We really couldn't hear each other, and it was hard to feel the timing and balance," said Mitchell Weiss. But the audience was completely taken, not only with the music, but with the venue. At the end of the concert, the orchestra received one standing ovation after another, prompting them to perform 3 encores, including a repeat of It's a Small World with the Disney characters on the castle ramps. Appearing alongside them were Roy Disney and Lillian Disney. As the concert ended, chimes played the chorus of When You Wish Upon a Star. The concert was followed by a champagne reception in the Crystal Palace on Main Street for invited guests. Guests holding glasses could walk through Adventureland and around the castle and marvel at the landscape created by the Disney team. For many, the Magic Kingdom reminded them of Disneyland in California, only with wider streets and full-sized buildings. It was Walt's park, but on a larger scale. Also, the formal reception felt more like a cultural affair than an entertainment event. Perhaps this was the influence of Roy Disney. No one stayed particularly late, as there were still 2 more days of events, including a lunch presentation the following day at the Contemporary that would feature comedian Bob Hope. I'll be back next Sunday to continue our story about the opening of Walt Disney World. And over on Bandcamp, newly posted, you'll find the story of the Disney camp shows from World War II. And later this week, I'll update our 2021 guide to Disneyland for the holiday season. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. Without subscribers, we'd simply cease to exist. If you enjoy these podcasts, if you find them a meaningful part of your week, please support us by becoming a monthly subscriber over on Bandcamp. On Bandcamp, you'll find dozens and dozens of extra episodes. But the best reason to subscribe is to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can subscribe at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Until next time, this is Todd James Pierce.